So we have a wonderful panel with us. We have assimilated a lot of people who have a lot of experience in DevOps, security, and a lot of wisdom to share. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Diego, we'll start with you.
My name is Diego Castro. I am a Salesforce architect and owner of a small SI. I was a developer and architect in my previous life.
Hello, my name's Natalie MacDonald. I'm a customer of Salesforce and Flosum. I work for a company called Cushman Wakefield, a global commercial real estate company. And I've been in Salesforce for a very long time. And I just want to say this is one of the best accidents ever that I am sporting the Flosum colors. When I picked out what I was going to wear today, it was not planned, but I could be a role model here.
Yeah, I noticed that right away. Nice work. I'm Rachel Beard. I'm a distinguished security architect here at Salesforce. I've been at the company for 10 years, but I've also been in the ecosystem for a very long time, about 17 years. I specialize in all things security, compliance, data governance, and privacy.
Awesome, great, thank you. So I know there's a lot of wisdom on this side of the room as well. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you want to share something, please speak up. Would love to hear from you as well. So before we get started, would love to understand on how you see the state of, in general, of the Salesforce DevOps market, Salesforce security market. If you can touch upon that. You know, there's a lot of confusion about different tools, different methodologies, org-based, source-based. How do you see the state of Salesforce DevOps? And why is it so in a state of flux?
I guess when I first started out in the ecosystem, change sets were like the de facto way of like doing your deployments. And I guess over the years, I've seen in DevOps, like things like you would use your Ant tools and Jenkins to deploy. That was like the way that you would have a mature DevOps system in like 2015. And now I'm seeing like even like small like SMBs, they're starting to think a little bit more about how they are how to like they're starting to think about DevOps when like back then it wasn't really the case. So even and now Salesforce even provided like more like they provided like things like DevOps Center when before they just be on their own and they would just have to use change sets to deploy their things. And then even then, like we see things like, you know, Flosum, Capado Gear said that there's been this ponderance of DevOps vendors off the shelf that buyers can choose to implement in their Salesforce orgs.
Yeah, and I like to think about the problems of DevOps are kind of a microcosm of the problems of IT, right? So you have beginning customers on Salesforce and many, many years of people with tech debt on Salesforce. DevOps has to solve all those problems. And when we started to talk about what we've been hearing about tonight with DevSecOps, we weren't even thinking about that when we were implementing DevOps. We were just thinking about how to get a stronger, tighter control of our processes and what tools and or process can help us do that. And we weren't thinking about SecOps. And now, like the impact of other things like AI and compliance and security and breaches and all those things start to infuse on the problems of DevOps. So to answer your question, I think that's why it's in flux. It's constantly changing, and the different levels of customers and what they have to handle is constantly changing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's by nature, security is becoming more proactive than reactive. I know we've always seen it be an afterthought before, but now the stakes are way too high. There's threats coming from all directions. And there's also an expanding global data privacy challenge that's ever changing. So it's more important than ever to build in security by design principles and privacy by design principles. So I'm seeing much more of an emphasis of this from the very beginning.
Yeah, you know, so when I started Flosum, at that time, I used to be more on the front lines, and I used to show the demo of the product to customers. And many of the customers would say, whatever you have built, it's an absolute waste of time. This is not required. And then within a quarter, Salesforce came up with Salesforce DX with all the concepts of, you know, unlock packages and all those things. And that validated the whole Salesforce DevOps market. And it grew from there. And I feel security is also, I feel a little bit the way I see it from a mindset perspective. I think customers don't realize that they have a shared sense of responsibility. I see Salesforce doing everything that they can. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars in protecting customers' data, but customers also have a onus of protecting their data. And that's where I feel a little bit gap in the mindset from customers' perspective. How do you see Salesforce DevOps, different, and Salesforce security different from like other technologies and other traditional application systems like C or Java or what typical corporate IT has?
I think the thing that stands out to me is that Salesforce markets its development and customization as easy, where you probably wouldn't hear that from like other traditional like engineering stacks or technology stacks. So the marketing is certainly that it's easy to develop and customize on top of Salesforce, which lends itself to like it's a double-edged sword where it's easy to build and deploy things, but because of that, it's also easy to cause messes in your Salesforce instance. So I think that's at least one thing that stands out to me about what makes development or administrative work on top of Salesforce different than other technology stacks.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Diego said. It's all magic, right? How it gets from the beginning into production, and it's really taken for granted. And I think that's one of the kind of fallacies. It's not. There's a lot of work, and the tools support that work. I think the other thing that's interesting is that it's not just the deployment process. A lot of the people in our business think about DevOps as getting it into production, but the relationship between the intake all the way through to the deployment process is so important. And in our world, it's important because we have a SOX compliant production application. So we have to prove that everything went into production, was asked for and approved and tested. And without tools and a process, you can't do that. So I think it kind of flows together because of those problems as well.
And of course, like a true Salesforce person, I'm going to say that one differentiator is, of course, trust being our number one priority, right? So you know that the Salesforce platform is safe. So I think there's even more focus on that shared responsibility model and on protecting yourself from insider threats. And insider threats can be a bad actor, but they can also be accidental misuse of data or accidental data leakage. So Joe was, laughing about the dongle that's been attached over here and locked to the podium, but that's because somebody wants to walk away with that thing as much as somebody just picks up their laptop and accidentally takes it with them. The protection is necessary either way. So I think that it's a really huge focus on preventing data loss and making sure that you have compliant usage of sensitive data.
Might just add one thing that the security, one the shameless post of like, it's all in the book, you see it. But really, it's about, sorry, I was just saying that from a security perspective, as it comes to Salesforce, and, of course, I've kind of worked with also AWS a little bit, with Google Cloud a little bit, and so forth. What I realize is that you have 40 flavors of security in Salesforce. And you don't realize that until you get a security posture that says, oh, you're running this flow in a system context or something, which is kind of put on an experience cloud on a public profile enabled thing. You don't hear those kind of things in a .NET application. It's group bucket policies. You look at the whole modular aspect of things, you apply security, you get into the intricate details of it, but not at the level at which Salesforce does. Now, one of the things that I also realized is that Salesforce did that for flexibility and modularity. And Salesforce has so many modules, not only at a app level, but component level, then app level, then org level, then product level, then industry level, and so many other things that they're adding as well. And I think as they're adding more, security becomes much more complicated with its advanced products, such as now we are seeing it with CDP and AI, where security is a whole different layer, where Salesforce had to come up with a trust layer, just to kind of handle security for that. So that's just an example of like how monumental is security in the aspect of Salesforce compared to maybe an AWS or Azure implementation.
So my experience is, we have an application called as Trust Center. at Flosum, and essentially it automates all the aspects of security that customers have to do from their side. Salesforce is doing their part of the job, but then customers have to tighten the security from that part. So it automates all the aspects like, user management, data masking, data protection, all those kinds of things. And what we see is when we show it to Salesforce owners, they get excited about it. They connect with it, and they see they have to do those things. But then when they take it to the security owner in the organization, which is typically a different department, that's when they get shut down. And what we see is like there's a gap of like not having a clear owner of who owns security for Salesforce within an organization. What do you think, Natalie, about that? What's the mindset within the organization? What do you guys see of who owns security of Salesforce in a typical IT organization?
Yeah, I think the IT organization owns it. We were talking about this earlier, Girish. In our organization and in most, and this isn't the first enterprise organization I've worked at, it's just the most recent, there is InfoSec, but they don't really pay attention to the application. They deal with problems like firewalls and data breaches. And the only time they really get involved with you is when there's a problem or when something comes up. So it's not really looked at, and there's not really a focus on really data security. It's InfoSec security until there's a breach. So that's really one of the problems. And on the Salesforce level, who's really looking at the confidentiality of data? Unless you have very specific needs that came up, like you're taking credit cards and stuff like that. But otherwise, it's just not really looked at until it needs to be. And I think that's one of the problems. And it's one of those things that the organization wants to invest in, but it's like an insurance policy, right? They'd rather invest in new functionality than in something until it is a problem. And then that's when it really comes up for most organizations.
I've never seen an InfoSec team audit the Apex classes of a Salesforce org to look at if they're using with or without sharing or with security enforced or anything like that. I just frankly haven't seen an InfoSec team with a deep level of Salesforce knowledge. And on the flip side, I haven't seen like a Salesforce team with like deep like security knowledge. So I think it's a problem on both sides.
Yeah, and that's a big part of my job is conducting these kinds of workshops that are a little bit like family therapy to get everybody talking on the same page with the same goal in mind to develop these innovations, but also make sure that you're confronting your security and privacy requirements. It's really important.
I'll say a funny story. So again, I used to be on the front line selling Flosum, and I had a developer who was evaluating Flosum solution. And he said, steal all my data for you want, just make my life easier. This is funny because I was an employee of Salesforce, and I used to help customers do the evaluation of the Salesforce platform from a security point of view. And most customers, they do a thorough due diligence of the Salesforce platform from a security point of view, compliance point of view, privacy point of view. They would spend 6 months to like some customers would spend years to do the evaluation of the Salesforce platforms from security point of view. And then when I have to select an app, today in many organizations, an admin could install an app which is opening up all the IP addresses, and the customer has purchased Salesforce Shield to protect the data, and then they're exposing all the data to a different partner, right? So it's, I think it's something I think that has to be thought about, and yeah. Natalie, from your perspective, what led you to like the starting of the evaluation of DevOps solution? And how did you get ready for that process of selecting the right DevOps solution for your organization?
Yeah, so we've been on a little bit of an evolution. When I started with Cushman Wakefield, we were using what everyone else was using, change sets, and we knew we needed DevOps, and we wanted to go to something, but didn't have a lot of money to invest in it. So we went to some open source mix with Jenkins and Bitbucket, and we were using Jira at the time. That helped us get a little bit more mature, but it was still open source and it still had limitations. So then when we really decide we need to invest in it, we need to qualify how we would do that. One of the big drivers for us was being able to get more throughput on what we were doing and also have better controls and compliance. When we decided what our requirements were, then we started looking at the tools will provide that. We've actually implemented a really nice solution, which is interesting. And that's we're using the Salesforce Agile Accelerator with Flosum. And we love that partnership because it's all on the platform for us now. And we can tell the story from intake, like I said earlier, all the way to deployment on who asked for it, who tested it, how it got in there. And we can do it all on one platform. So those were our requirements. I know different organizations have different, but I'd say probably take it back to the requirements. What do you need to do? And how do you qualify it? We weren't really looking for the throughput as much as the compliance. We had to tell that story because we have to do SOX audits, and we have to say, not just on an audit trail, you know, what was deployed, but who asked for it and who approved that it was deployed. And a lot of tools can't tell that story unless you put them all together. So DevOps becomes not just build and deliver, but it's request all the way through delivery and approval. So it's interesting. We're still building on the maturity though, for sure. I put us somewhere between 3 and 4 on that scale that we talked about earlier, because there's so much changing. And as soon as you think you're almost there, then another requirement comes in, and it's always going to be a battle. Like testing automation is not something we're there at yet, and we're trying to bring that in now, and that adds another layer. So you can say it's tested before you can even deploy it. We have manual processes for that, of course, but if you want to automate it, then it becomes something that you have to build into it.
It's a never-ending process, right? Rachel, do you want to share, or Diego, on how do you see customers getting into the evaluation of DevOps solutions?
I can talk about one specific use case where we had a development team that was really like technically skilled, and so it was a mix of it was an in-house DevOps tool, effectively, and it was working really well. But the issue is that it wasn't necessarily working well for the admins. So the admins didn't have like a great knowledge of Git, and so they found it to be incredibly cumbersome to use, and sometimes to the detriment of like the velocity at which like the business was expecting their features to be deployed. And so ultimately, it led the engineering director to evaluate like the market, and SOX compliance was definitely a factor, but also making sure that there was a great ease of use for not just the developers, but also the admins as well. So that's at least like some of the decision-making criteria that I've seen some customers use.
Yeah, and I just want to see that when these requirements are coming in, to your point, that there's some evaluation, not just of the functionality of what it's going to do, but what data is going to be processed. How does this impact our flows for things like GDPR and CCPA? Do we need any kind of consent treatment, especially as we look forward to incorporating more AI processes? What data is going to be collected, and will it need any kind of new legislation around consent capture and things like that?
Yeah, and 2 great points made. What you said about admins being able to use the tools. When we had Jenkins, it was not a tool for the admins, and our admins followed a completely separate process because it was a more technical tool. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a challenge.
And sometimes I've seen the solution be, well, upskill your admins on Git, but that's sometimes that's not a quick process, right? So sometimes people might decide it's easier to rip and replace what was there before and replace it with something that's a bit more friendly. But I think it's really dependent on like the size of the team, how much money the CIO or like the VP of IT has to spend on a DevOps solution, team maturity. Like there's a bunch of factors that are at play when it comes to like evaluating what's the right like DevOps solution for a given team.
Yeah, and even on the compliance side, Flosum now is part of your environment. So, or whatever your DevOps tool is, if it needs to be compliant, that is an ancillary tool in the compliance world that needs to be auditable and compliant as well. And open source tools will be more challenged, you know, if you have to go down that as a requirement.
That has been a philosophy at Flosum. So when we started building Flosum, we said Salesforce is a very different platform. It's not like a traditional platform like a Java platform or C platform. So it needs a different kind of DevOps treatment. And I don't know if in DevOps word is the right word, but we stuck to it because we didn't want to get into a category creation game. It's because it's got to do with a lot of metadata and a lot of companies. If you see like at Salesforce TDX, there are a lot of companies which are in that space on metadata management and looking at technical debt. So we said it's a very different platform from a cloud perspective. It's a very different platform because it's a low-code platform. And that's why the culture of Salesforce is very different. You have a lot of admins, whereas like in a Java community, it's hardcore programmers. So we need a very different treatment, which is required for the DevOps world. And customers are thinking about security always. Most customers, they had a hard time transitioning into cloud because of security. That was the #1 obstacle. So we didn't want customers to go through the whole security process again. And that is why we built all our applications native and security first. We don't ask customers to open any IP addresses, no ports, nothing to us. We don't run any servers. Everything runs within Salesforce. And that is how most of the solutions for Flosum perform. Any questions, thoughts from the audience?
So the thing is, right, we're talking as of new engagements.
Yeah, we're never a dull moment. We do a lot of these workshops, but there's always an opportunity to revisit your security and governance processes, and even to your point.
And it has to be continuous, right? It's what I see is when customers purchase Salesforce, security teams are evaluating the Salesforce platform, but then when they're buying individual apps, they don't look at security at all, you know? So that org security, it should also be instrumented at when they're purchasing individual apps, not just the main Salesforce platform.
Carlos, I had a similar story. One time I was writing a doc and I copy pasted something from Salesforce onto the document. And then about 15 minutes later, I got a Slack ping from InfoSec saying, "Why did you copy paste credit card information?" And I said, "I didn't. I copy pasted a Salesforce ID." And they're like, "Oh, well, we didn't know what that was," right? So I think it goes to show you that like having InfoSec and Salesforce like kind of working together would prevent these kinds of like it basically would afford them to be speaking the same language where they wouldn't be confusing an 18-digit or 15-digit character with sensitive like credit card information. Like they're not confusing the two. So your story reminded me of that thing that happened to me a few years ago. And I completely agree with your sentiment. It's exposing your security, so who cares if how everything else is secure? You're exposing it to a third-party app, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the acceptance criteria given to us by the business never include, you know, security, do they? But I do think you make a great point that the bridge between InfoSec and DevOps on Salesforce has got to continue to close. And tools alone don't solve that. They definitely will help. But how you implement that and what parts you do, because even if you have a tool that does security scanning before you go to production, doesn't mean you've implemented that on your tool as part of your process, right? And unless someone asks you to, you're probably never going to. So it's a great point you make, Diego. Yeah, I'm sorry, Carlos. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I think we'll wrap up here. We are running late on time, so with that, let's wrap. Thank you so much, Rachel, Natalie, Diego, for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
to answer any questions and collaboration after. Yeah.